Okay, so we're back with you. This is actually now the second of what we realize is four videos of 10 to 15 minutes each that we need to record for you. We've gone from three to four because we realize we need and want to unpack a bit more detail around the relationship between story and narrative and some of the tools that have been gleaned and developed by Stronger Stories based upon their insights, which we started to unpack in video number one, which hopefully you watched yesterday. The purpose of video number one and this video number two is to start you thinking about the relationship of story and narrative to the facility and what we started to talk about in our first call. Guy, over to you.
Thank you. So yesterday we looked at sort of four insights to how you can use stories to make change happen. And this video is just to look at the fifth. And it's worth unpacking this because it's so important. And this is about how to keep the story moving so that people feel in control of the change that we want them to be part of. Three areas that we've broken it down into: narratives, momentum, and tools. The key thing with narratives is its relationship with stories. And I think it's really helpful to kind of set out what we mean by a story. So a story is an account of real people and events where change happens. So the key bit here is that it has to be real and change has to happen. A narrative is a big overarching idea. And so the relationship is that stories can either help establish or defend and reinforce a narrative, or they can be used to build up and challenge and overthrow and install a new narrative. And to give a quick example, just to bring it to life with the coronavirus, there is a big idea that washing hands stops the spread of the virus. And then you can see there's lots and lots of different ways that that idea can be brought to life through stories. So whether that's about singing happy birthday, or whether it's about children doing the pepper test to learn about the virus. Similarly with climate, there's many narratives, one of which is act now to stop the breakdown. And you can see how that works with lots of stories that range from the IPCC report saying we have 12 years through to Mark Carney, Bank of England governor, saying act now or die as an organization. What's happening at the moment is that we're looking at a lot of narratives that are shifting all at the same time, and they're shifting to different degrees. So if we want to understand how and where to make change, we need to know which narratives we've got the best opportunity to leverage stories to make that change happen. And the key thing, going back to our 9 steps yesterday, is that we're able to look at and understand which stories are working, and in particular zooming in to 2 critical steps. So the call to adventure, which is the trigger for change, and then crossing the threshold, which is the moment when change starts to happen. And what we can do is go really deep into those stories and understand the core emotions at the heart of those triggers for change. So what is it that is driving people? And what's really important for us as storytellers is also to understand that fear as an emotion will only take you so far. So if we want long-lasting, impactful change, actually, we're going to have to use other emotions or a combination of other emotions. And then once we've done that, we're able to quickly reassemble stories and deliver those out into the world at the speed, scope, and scale that's required for us to suddenly have a lot of better stories all aligned so that we can start to shift narrative. In terms of story momentum, I thought it'd be useful to maybe share some quick insights into some of the stories around Greta to highlight some of the key things. One of which is that we understand the world first and foremost through other people's experience. So when we're talking about really sophisticated arguments for kind of change, actually we always need to draw them back down to kind of like personal relevance. And you're able to kind of like move through those kind of different layers. So although through Greta, we've been able to have quite sophisticated conversations and people have gone on quite sophisticated journeys, right at the heart of it is a very, very simple human story. The interesting thing, and why we wanted to use Greta, is that climate strike movement obviously started a few years before Greta was able to kick it off successfully. And looking at various story data points around that original climate strike movement, we can see that some key aspects of the storytelling were missing. So, for example, it didn't have relatable everyday heroes. There wasn't a personal story for us to relate to. One of the other kind of key things that Greta's stories do successfully is that it gives it momentum by making room for other people to change. And in particular, this is about the hero becoming the mentor and allowing room for more people to become heroes. And in particular, allowing the villain to start acting heroically. And that goes right to the core of how stories work for us as a species. So the most popular stories, most successful ones, are very often to do with rebirth and redemption. So going back to kind of Greta's story, she has been able to kind of shift over into the role of mentor for Gen Z to step up and become the hero. And the story itself has become more sophisticated. And last September, as an example, with the general climate strike, the adults, the parents who were in danger of becoming the villain of the story, were actually offered the chance for redemption and were allowed to sort of become heroes for a day. And that starts their journey of change. And you can see how all of this layers on. You start to become a movement through storytelling. We start to sort of build from personal to tribal to kind of world storytelling. And the last aspect, which is absolutely kind of critical, is that what we're doing here through these kind of stories and allowing room for people to come in is that we're not just making sense of what's going on now, and we're not just using story to bring to life a different future, but we're actually helping people tell a better story about where they've come from. And that idea about reconstructing the stories that we've told ourselves and that identity that's kind of built up, changing our past, is one of the biggest steps and most overlooked steps for creating a story for change. And obviously, Greta's story is not static. So you can see how she's brought in at different stages, different allies, different crossing the threshold moments, different calls to the adventure. The last bit we just wanted to focus on was story tools, because it's great knowing that in theory, but how can you start to practically applying it to your story? And the key thing here, hopefully, as you sort of picked up over the first two videos, is that we know stories are messy, living things. So whatever story you want to say, that's not necessarily what is heard by someone else, and it's not necessarily what they pass on. So we like to sort of help people kind of manage. So we've kind of created, all of our tools are open IP. They're all sort of freely available. They're being digitized so that we can build movement from the grassroots up to this idea of story activism. And again, you can just kind of see with the lean canvas how easy it is to be able to kind of sketch out stories and test stories.
Sorry, Guy, I'm going to jump in there just for clarification. Could you go back a slide? So this is an adaptation of the Stronger Stories approach to identifying and making sense of story, mapped onto the lean canvas or the business model canvas, as many of you will be familiar with.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And actually, that does raise an interesting point. So up until now, I've shown you the framework. If you think about the Hollywood examples of a very sort of chronological journey where a hero is introduced at the beginning of the story and goes on a journey of change to an endpoint. But as we know, we're dealing with people that are always at different points of a journey. And so actually having the story mapped out in this format means that you're not prioritizing one step over another. And so it might actually mean that you need to start a story for a particular stakeholder with the compelling villain, because you need to grab their attention. You need the cortisol. For another stakeholder, actually, it might be about the call to adventure. But the idea is you're telling the same story. It's consistent. Other key things to think about in terms of storytelling and that we kind of make available is the fact that we have different communication preferences. as individuals. We all like to see and receive information in different ways. And of course, whilst we're talking about our story brain and we're talking about being narrative hungry, clearly we're also logical and rational animals, and we can make sense of data, particularly in stories. So people are divided in kind of slightly different ways. Some people have a preference for facts and logic, and therefore your data really needs to be, your story rather, really needs to be led with data and really needs to be, you know, deeply technical and proving the impact. For other people, actually, it's about the vision of the future. It might be about visuals and metaphors. For some people, it's about the plan. It's about the detail, the steps. And for other people, it's all about the human experience. Framing is absolutely critical. Here's just, you know, sort of one way of kind of viewing framing in terms of diagnostic, prognostic, and motivational framing. Clearly, this lends itself to the language that you choose, the symbolism that you use, the codes that you use. Again, all of these are sort of sophisticated parts of storytelling, but they're skills and tools that can be learned and used. We have taken the canvas and created, I guess, kind of crossovers so that you can say, right, I now know what my 9 steps are. How do I translate that into my marketing assets, into my website, into my kind of brochure, into my communications plans? And here you can kind of see very quickly, if you just take one question as an example about the ordinary world, you're then, you know, we're able to kind of like provide examples so that people can be inspired about the next steps that they wish to take and what good looks like, what's working. Another example is about pitching to funders. So again, you can overlay the canvas and the steps of those canvas once you've kind of got them to a particular type of communication, which is the pitch, or a different type of communication, which might be speech writing. So for example, this is the pattern behind Martin Luther King and Steve Jobs' speech. And again, you're able to kind of like overlay and translate your canvas-based story into this sort of speech pattern. So just to recap, all of this is about how to keep the story moving. It's about understanding which narratives have got the potential to be changed and what stories are going to give you the best opportunity for making that change happen. The tips and the insights about how you kind of keep momentum up with stories, and then the practical tools about how you're then able to apply it to the assets, the storytelling assets, the channels, the tactics that you want to deploy. And again, all of this can be done at scale and digitally. So if you've got a big group of stakeholders that you all want to move together behind one story, it's totally feasible.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Guy. Excuse me. Hopefully nobody saw my 4-year-old son run in and try and take my computer off me during that session. The joys of this new way of working. So that's part 2 in our asynchronous journey towards a wider group conversation on Monday. That completes the more sort of general overview of tools and insights related to story and narrative. In video 3, which we're going to work on later today, and video 4 of the weekend, we'll be diving more into the stories and narratives that we are starting to look at around stimulus packages, around UNDP, and video 4 around the facility. So thank you very much, Guy, and see you all very soon.